So we changed the title of the presentation because nobody was sat here 10 minutes ago. So we thought, let's put blockchain and AI in together and we're going to get some people. But actually, that is what I want to talk about. So I don't know if anybody heard me earlier on the panel, but the thesis of Outlier Ventures, which is the venture firm that I founded over 4 years ago that specializes in investing in blockchain, is what we call the Convergence thesis. And within that, the convergence economy. And so what that means is we believe that distributed ledger technologies, smart contracts, and cryptographically secure digital assets represent a new web technology stack that enables other technologies to to scale securely, like IOTA, AI, 3D printing, AR, VR, and then interestingly, converge and combine. And we think this is going to be an acceleration of technical innovation, but there's lots of considerations about that. So on the one hand, it's very technically exciting, but equally, what are the social impacts of that rate of innovation that's going to be coming about? So as I said, we've been investing in the blockchain space for over 4 years now. And we have a number of investments where we've led and been advisor, including IOTA, Ocean Protocol, Fetch.ai, and Sovereign, and several others that are going to be happening this year. So the kind of key premise that I want to present to you today is, what if we can hard code economics and game theory into the fabric of the web, rather than allow that to happen almost separate to it by the commercial entities that govern it, own it, and how they're financed? And how can we make sure that that then allows for citizens to have better ownership of these new web systems that we're creating? So we can create a web that is not extractive, but can be enhancing. So the reason why that this is important is the existential threat that we all face, whether that's as a citizen, as a corporation, or a government working on behalf of a group of citizens, is that increasingly with every day that passes, we're becoming more ever reliant upon a handful of AI companies. And they've become AI companies because they were platform monopolies that became data monopolies that became AI monopolies. And it's no coincidence that actually if you put their names together, it spells bats fangs. Because it's inherently extractive, and the interests of shareholders are misaligned with users. And so what I propose is that this new web could be different. And it can be different because we can hard code some different rules into it so it behaves in a different way and it's owned in a different way. And so, I always say that this is the existential threat, and it's really upon us. We have a very small window of opportunity whereby even if we manage to create this decentralized web alternative, the level of intelligence that will be amassed by these handful of companies, we won't be able to catch up with. We know that this business model has been subverting media and potentially politics, and this new potential Web3 environment could be something different. So when I say the convergence economy, I use the word economy to frame just what this means. It means that we're going to touch almost every area of our lives, from health, mobility, e-government, industry, and fintech. So to date, these bats' fangs have been concentrated on just facilitating us in a social environment whereby that data can be derived at serving as better ads. But increasingly, be it Alexa entering your home or your car, be it IBM Watson and other centralized solutions being used for energy grids and new energy systems, these AI monopolies are touching almost every part of our life, and almost invisibly. So it's not just about media, it's about the entire economy around us. So the reason why I think Web3, this new Web3 stack, I try to avoid using the word blockchain unless it's to get people in the room, and then once they're there, I try to expand on it a little bit more. So for me, blockchain technologies is a catch-all term comprised of distributed ledger technology, digitally scarce assets, smart contracts, and a concept such as autonomous economic agents So agents that can live on a blockchain and that can be autonomous, degrees of autonomy, and bring intelligence to these systems. They represent the next phase of the web, the next web paradigm. And I believe fundamentally that that can be the antidote to Web 2, and interestingly, much more aligned to Tim Berners-Lee's original vision of a web commons, one that's much more peer-to-peer and more equitable. And that's really important when we're thinking about creating autonomous systems. So when we talk about Web 3, we're talking about this shift from a centralized web dominated by a handful of monopolies to something that's more decentralized. And decentralization for me is not totality. I don't think you can be dogmatic about it. It's a spectrum. But ultimately, it's decentralized in the way that it's removing intermediaries. If you do not provide any value, you will be removed from that system. And so they're ultimately more peer-to-peer environments. And what's most interesting for me when you're thinking of, in the context of convergence, and this technology being applied to, say, AI or IOT, is it can enable machine-to-machine. So peer-to-peer is not just people-to-people. It can be machine-to-machine. It can be agent-to-agent. So intelligent entity to intelligent entity. And ultimately, what we're seeing, since I've been investing in the space for over 4 years, probably until the beginning part of last year, almost everybody in the blockchain space were building proprietary solutions that they hoped somebody would buy. And there was this real disconnect with the decentralized web, but nobody really knew any different. And their end state was to be bought by bats' fangs, right, which would just compound the problem. What we started to see with the advent of tokenization, which obviously has a bad rap for a number of reasons, largely because, as I said earlier, everybody's now got a money printing press. And that's both an amazingly empowering thing, and it's also slightly insane. So anybody anywhere can give birth to a digital economy or just create a shitcoin. There's largely a load of shitcoins at the moment, but the potential is new digital economies. And what's most important about that is these things are open source. So 90% of startups and approaches that are building protocols, infrastructure, are doing so in an open sourced way. So it might be totally open sourced from day one. It might be partially open sourced. What's really interesting is the entity that owns and governs this protocol, this technology, is often a non-profit foundation. Now you think at how at odds that is with the current Web 2 paradigm. So yes, people are making loads of money, but ultimately the entity that owns and governs this technology is a non-profit often, and aside from that, it's open source. And so the idea that we can open source protocols, we can tokenize them, and tokens can be fractionalized. So what that means is that anybody, so even though a Bitcoin may be worth an astronomical amount of money, although going down at the moment, the fact is it can be fractionalized. And so that means as an economic system, it's much easier for people to both enter it, participate in it, and earn value. And the way to think about it is as a crowdfunding 2.0. It's very early days yet, so you shouldn't judge it for what it is, but what it could be. My belief is that what this will enable are universal, open, public utilities. That's how I think of the protocols that we're investing in. Largely, we're not investing in companies. We're investing in communities that own a protocol and are going to develop that collectively. And if you think about what all that means, this is probably the largest socio-economic experiment we've ever witnessed. As I said, anybody can create a digital economy. It's the same problem when you have monkeys with a typewriter. At some point, somebody's going to write Shakespeare. You just need enough monkeys. Well, fortunately, we've got loads of monkeys. The opportunity is that it's programmable money. These systems are programmable, so we can hard code game theory into how these systems work. We can incentivize certain behaviors. We can disincentivize other behaviors. So when we work with a project, we engage with economists from places like Imperial College, who begin to think through the behavioral economics. If it's an existing economy, how does it function? How does it dysfunction? How could we fix that in a decentralized way? If it's an entirely new economy, how can we think through the market layer, the dynamics of that market, its stakeholders and shareholders, and think about how we can optimize it? What's amazing about this is, because it's open source, these things can be really iterative. So it is an experiment. Bitcoin is an experiment. All these protocols are experiments. And ultimately, if they're open source, if you don't like it, if you're a subset of the community and you don't like the governance, you don't like the design choices, you can fork it. You can create a derivative of it. You can create a child of it. And you can ultimately change the rules of the game. And for me, that's the big opportunity. We can change the rules of the game for the web as it stands. So the consequences to that are, these things look much more biological and evolutionary in nature, and actually makes them much less fragile. So if you think about proprietary technology, the problem with proprietary technology, at least from an investor's perspective, is 90% of startups fail in their first 3 years. So 90% of all capital that goes into this is literally thrown out the window. All know-how's lost, largely all code's lost. Most companies don't get acquired, they just fail. That's a really inefficient way to finance and power innovation, and it creates this stop-start zero-sum game. If we're moving to an environment where increasingly we're talking about open source technologies and protocols, these things are less fragile. If I don't like it, somebody gets hit by a bus, we can fork it, we can create a new version. And potentially the way to think about it, again, as an investor is, the ledger becomes a cap table. So if I'm on the first ledger, if I invest in the genesis, if that first team that seed it fail to execute, somebody can pick up that code, and if they want to take the community with them, they'll fork the ledger, and they will preserve the holdings of every other token holder on that ledger. Which basically means if I invest in the first one, every child that it has, I also have a stake in. So it totally changes the whole rules of the game in terms of how we invest in these things. Most importantly, because it's open source, it can't be bought and killed off. The classic approach for an incumbent is, as something comes along and challenges your model, you buy it, and if you fail to integrate it, which is what often happens, then you kill it. This is not possible with this new web infrastructure, and that's why I like to think of it as a Pandora's box. It's already been opened. It's not going to go away, and it's increasingly pernicious. So the way to think about, the way that I think about the things that we're investing in is the open protocols and standards that created the foundations for the web as we know it today were primarily open source, and that's why they gained such adoption and traction. And this proprietary layer got built on top that amassed data. But actually what we're now looking at doing is creating a next layer of technology stack and protocols equivalent to HTTP as standards that will enable interoperability and universal adoption of these new solutions and services. And a really good example of that is Sovereign. Sovereign.org is an investment that we've made. We're an advisor to. They basically created an identity layer for the web. And now there's loads of people that are saying they're doing that. They're creating a decentralized identity solution. What they're doing is they're creating an app. That is not the same as creating a protocol that enables for decentralized identity in a zero knowledge proof environment. So this means I reveal as much as I want to reveal, and I give permissions and revoke permissions on my data and my identity. And it can be totally anonymous, or it can be something else. So I can choose to reveal certain things to certain people. This is such a fundamental layer to Web3 that until somebody solves this, practically every other application that you might want to build on blockchain is bullshit. It cannot be decentralized. So I always say the focus now should be on building out these protocols. Yes, we know there are many use cases for blockchain, many exciting use cases for decentralization. But the reality is the infrastructure is just not there yet to allow them to scale and be usable by the average person. So if you think about tokens as an incentive mechanism, and a few people call it token engineering when you think through how you're going to design these systems. How do I engineer these systems? So if a token is an incentive, what is the objective? What are we trying to do? I think the common objective is how can we incentivize the mass coordination of a decentralized web? So we're going to decentralize the web, and this is the means through which we're going to do it. A lot of people have a problem with the level of speculation and money that's being generated, and on one hand, I do as well. But the reality is greed is a really good motivator. And this is attracting a huge brain trust. I'd argue the greatest brain trust being applied to any set of technologies in the world. And that's not just exclusive to cryptography or distributed ledgers or Ethereum. It's now sucking in machine learning talent and AI talent. And this is what we need to be able to build something that could compete with Web 2 and all the capital and resources that the incumbents have. And so, one way to, an example to try and bring this to life so it's not so esoteric. Another investment of ours is Ocean Protocol. We're the largest investor in Ocean. They're out of Berlin. And they're effectively using tokens and token engineering to incentivize distributed networks to contribute resources to AI. And so if you think about what does that ecosystem look like, well, we need people to commit compute power. We need people to commit data. We need people to curate that data. We need people to train algorithms. So there's a whole stakeholder group that needs to be somehow incentivized to create an alternative to Google DeepMind. Ocean Protocol is already attempting to do that. We have another investment I'll talk a little bit later that's tackling the same problem from a slightly different angle. IOTA was an investment where we were the lead investor, the first institutional investor into IOTA. They built a protocol specifically to enable affordable and secure IoT data transfer and micropayments between machine to machine. So they looked at the current blockchain technologies and said, well, actually, we need to remove a particular economic actor in that system, which is the miner, because it was creating the wrong economic dynamics to allow for transactions to happen on a distributed ledger that may have no value. And that's true for the machine-to-machine economy. Hundreds of billions of transactions of tiny bits of data that may have no value. So if the cost of transacting is prohibitively high, you cannot have a decentralized IoT infrastructure. So IOTA designed a specific protocol for that, taking the learnings of previous blockchains. And so you could call it a next-generation blockchain, even though there are no blocks and there's no chains. But there's a whole plethora of new protocols that are coming onto the market that are looking to tackle specific problems in specific technologies or specific economies. Seed tokens. So this is a project that we're lead investor and advisor to out of Silicon Valley. It's a global distributed team. They've been building bots for over 15 years. Very senior guys, very experienced building bots for people like Microsoft, Skype. They're creating a marketplace, effectively, for bots and bot developers, whereby each bot can have a license plate. Each constituent line of code that contributes to a bot can have a license plate, which means people can go into that environment, they can configure a bot for a particular use case. The people that contributed that code base get remunerated automatically through smart contracts. It's almost like licensing of code. And everybody can be sure that you can trust the different packets of code that are being contributed to that system. So it's enabling the open sourcing of bot development, and whereby the intelligence that's derived from those can be collectively owned. Nobody's done this yet, but it's one of my favorite examples of the possibilities of the convergence economy applied to something like 3D printing. The major problem with 3D printing at the moment is that nobody wants to put their CAD file anywhere near the internet, because it could be copied innumerable times and then it could be printed innumerable times. There's no incentive for anybody to put anything to do with 3D printing near the internet that has any value beyond a Star Wars Ewok. So where we can move towards, if we say your CAD file, your design file, becomes as unique and secure as a Bitcoin, and the printer becomes a wallet, and for the printer to transact with that asset, that design file, it must do so on a ledger that's auditable, that handles all the licensing and payments and rights distribution. That can be an entirely autonomous system for edge manufacturing. And that's not just for consumers, it's also for manufacturers. A number of large manufacturers are looking at this particular problem right now. And as I mentioned this earlier, one of the big things that needs to be solved is identity. So all of that's lovely, but until you can allow for self-sovereign identity and control of relationships and the data that's produced from them between people, objects, and agents, you're never going to have this autonomous peer-to-peer economy. So this isn't mine. I wish it was, and I can't remember who did it, so I can't reference them. But what it shows is this converging of technologies, and I believe the trigger point for that is distributed ledgers with the economic incentive of tokens and crypto assets. This is what's going to kick that into overdrive. It's going to make it exponential, and it's going to lead to a Cambrian explosion in terms of socioeconomics. So lastly, bringing all that together, the ultimate end state for me with the convergence economy is we can end up having secure but mass-coordinated autonomous systems. And we have a project called Fetch.ai out of Cambridge, England, made up of some of the early DeepMind team. They built an intelligent ledger. It self-organizes, it self-optimizes, it removes all the inefficiencies of a traditional blockchain, but most importantly, it allows for what are called autonomous economic agents. And so this is really marrying that concept of the technology and the economic principles, whereby a person, a company, a collective of people, in whatever form that takes, or an object can have a digital representative. It could have several digital representatives that go out there onto the ledger and transact on it or their behalf. It can organize systems bottom up, so most of the DeepMind team come from a gaming background, massively multiplayer gaming environments where intelligence is emergent. They've applied that technology to a new protocol to allow for autonomous systems. So all of this combines into how we look at an emergent stack which has multiple layers, starting from the data flow and data collection, moving up through to the authentication, validation of that data, the transportation of that data into interoperable systems, and then into marketplaces. And these can be personal data marketplaces, they can be IoT data marketplaces, or something else that we haven't yet even thought about, and moving up towards full autonomy. So you can go to our website, outlierventures.io/research, and you'll find a report we did on that, the updated report. We did the first one a couple of years ago. This is the most updated version, done in collaboration with a number of enterprises that buy into this vision. So this isn't something that sits outside of serious discussion enterprise. I think next week I'm going to Siemens, their internal conference, to present the convergence thesis. They already internally discuss things in the context of convergence, and we have a number of other corporate partners that invest with us that do the same. Bosch is a really great example. Bosch were able to invest in IOTA tokens. You think how crazy that is for a second. Bosch managed to convince the CEO to invest in magic money, magic internet money. So it's already happened, and it's going to continue to happen as these enterprises begin to understand that these protocols are going to become critical to their value chain, their supply chain, and these assets almost become commodities that will power these systems. So for them to not have a stake in that becomes of critical importance. So that's a presentation. I think we've got a couple of ability to have a Q&A and some questions. I don't know who's doing that. Do I just ask people? And I don't know whether you've got a microphone, so...
We'll help you with that.
Okay.
How about that? For one, we might have questions on our question wall, but yeah, let's start with the audience. Anybody that would want to ask a question right here in the front? Somebody's coming, I think, from both directions. Look at that.
Thanks for the talk, Jamie. So you mentioned that these systems are less fragile. Would you say that they're actually like anti-fragile in the sense that when they get hit, they actually get like stronger?
Resilient.
Yeah. It's
like, so I
know,
think
like
if you're following, no, they don't conform with the concept of anti-fragile, but I would say they're less fragile. And so the reason why I would make that distinction is because, ultimately they have this weird characteristic. On the one hand, that they're fractious. So as we've seen, there's always this threat of a fork. If it's totally open source, there's always this threat of a fork for whatever reason and whatever motive. So they have this tendency to kind of want to break up and fragment. And on the other hand, they have a tendency to want to consolidate. So there's the kind of network theory, and the idea if you have tokens, you have an economic system, an economic benefit within open source. Open source has network effects anyway. Add a economic incentive in there, and that's amplified. So you have this weird tension, and I don't think there's been enough. We don't have enough data to understand, whether these things could become totally anti-fragile. At the moment, I say they're just less fragile, they're less wasteful, but I wouldn't say anti-fragile.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks.
Let's take a question here from the message wall here in between. We have a question. Social media had a hand in the Arab Spring. Will blockchain bring Internet 3 or a Scandinavian utopia all over the world?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I did have, I think it was Europe's first social media consultancy. So I've basically, any hype wagon, I'm on it. And I remember we were very utopic when that came along. We were saying, well, we're going to disintermediate mainstream press. We're going to be able to take control of the narrative, and that's going to lead to a fundamentally better world. And I think we can all agree, on the one hand, it has. It's brought a more open, transparent world and things like WikiLeaks. But on the other hand, it's kind of had some very destructive effects on society, and right down to the individual, right? So I think we do have to be careful that we're not trying to build utopias. There is a strand, the original kind of core community behind Bitcoin were very libertarian, still are. And they believe in a dissolution of the state. They believe in getting rid of banks entirely. And whilst that might be possible, where does that take us? And so I try to be a bit more pragmatic, cautiously pragmatic. But I think one thing's for sure, the kind of, hopefully we've learned from the consequences of what companies existed out of Web 2. And, is Facebook what we want to happen with Web 3? So I think because the cycles are getting shorter as well, the technology cycles, generationally, most people can remember the utopia of one moving into the other. So I hope we bring that knowledge into how we begin to design Web 3.
Thank you.
Yeah, so any more from the audience? There on the side, yeah.
Hey, thanks. It was a really good talk. I enjoyed it a lot. One question. So on the economics, okay, why game theory? Why only game theory? This is something I've been wondering. I mean, for people who are talking about disruption and trying to change things, why take the most conservative kind of narrow understanding of economics? I mean, there's a lot more to that we could learn and start to code than only this incentivization of
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it doesn't end at game theory, but it might start there, because actually, if you think about what Bitcoin does, it did it in a very clever way, but it's actually a very basic protocol. What it allows for is a very kind of narrow form of value exchange, at least at the moment. And therefore, it doesn't need a lot of the complexity. I mean, it has to take into account inflation schedules. But what we've learned is that, just introducing some even basic concepts like velocity of money and inflation schedules and how we can try to better distribute the supply of these tokens or crypto assets from the token sale design, how you actually sell and who you sell to and in what quantities and on what terms. And how can those tokens work their way through to the end user? As I'm sure you will well appreciate by the question, these are incredibly complex problems. And so I think for me the starting point is, if we get the basic plumbing, the basic infrastructure out, we solve the basic problems. And then on top of that, you can start to have all kinds of innovations, which, to be honest with you, are above my pay grade. So I can only think within the limitations of my mental capacity, and it doesn't go much further than game theory, I'm afraid.
Right.
Thanks.
Any more? Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. One question is that you seem to have a very, very well prepared map of the Web 3. So I'd like to get some maybe qualification, or another way to frame the question would be that would you have a lot of conflicting things on the map? for example? Do you have different ideas of what the blockchain is, or whether the blockchain will stay at all? Or for example, in the big map that you had on the wall, are there conflicting directions for the future there?
It's a good question, and the answer is kind of yes and no. So obviously, the minute you put anything into something as simple as that, you're dramatically reducing down the level of complexity. So for example, a number of our investments that I talked about may actually fit in more than one of those layers. It might be a combination of one or two. So that's the framework of how we invest in the space, not necessarily how it will look in 5 years' time. I think anybody to try to predict, once you're throwing in economic theory with machine learning and distributed ledgers and cryptography, I mean, that is a very complex paradigm. So that's a gross oversimplification. And even within our portfolio, at least at the beginning, there might be some overlap between them. So they might look at each other and say, well, actually, within our vision statement, we might kind of touch upon one another. But the reality is, I think what starts to happen is, you have, certainly from the startup side, they have very grand visions, and then they begin to realize they get their product market fit in a way, right? Where they're executing, where they're deriving the most value. So I think the delineation between these technologies and layers, I think, will become clearer over the next 5 to 10 years. And the conflicts within there, I think, is a separate thing, which is, as I said in the beginning, for me, distributed ledger technologies and you don't always need a blockchain, right? You don't always. There's the trade-offs. There's cost, speed, and security. And some things just need to be really fast and can make some trade-offs around security. Some things you need to be permissioned, some things can be permissionless, sometimes they can be federated. The decision-making around how consensus is derived can be algorithmic, or it could be a group of people. So the great thing is, the reason why I'd say there's no conflict is because it could be any of these things. Does conflict exist within a particular configuration? Absolutely, because there's a trade-off. You're always trading something off for the other. But I think in totality as an ecosystem, you remove that conflict because, in theory, anybody can take your version, make some tweaks, have a totally different governance structure around it, and arrive at a different conclusion. So, but that's an optimist, I guess. You've got to be an optimist to be an investor. So,
Right.
Thank you. Do we have more questions from the audience? No. Let's give a big hand to Jamie and thank you.